Hi, I'm Sonia Manzano. I've spent most of my life being Maria on Sesame Street, but now I am an author and also an actor, but mostly an author. I'll never forget the first time I saw Sesame Street. I was a student at Carnegie Mellon University. It was very exciting, especially when they cut away to Susan and Gordon on the street, this charming African-American couple. In 1969, you did not see people of color on television. And you sure didn't see them talking to you from like an El Barrio neighborhood. In a neighborhood that looked like many of the neighborhoods I had been raised in. So that was the first time I saw it. I loved it immediately. I actually thought I could do this show. If it hadn't been for Sesame Street, I don't know where I would have ended up. I know I would have ended up in the arts somehow, but I actually had this vision of myself being a regional theater actress, because in regional theater, they do a lot of the classics, Shakespeare. And anybody of any color can do classics. But I didn't see any modern plays that I could be in. You didn't see Latins in plays. I didn't know what role I was gonna play, so I thought, well, I'll just try to do Shakespeare. But thankfully, I fell into Sesame Street. But I always loved television. I used to, even though I said I never saw anybody like myself, I used to love the black and white movies. I would die for Top Hat, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers dancing around. And one of the first pieces I wrote for Sesame Street was Maria and Emilio dressed up like Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, doing a song, a very famous, doing a song that I wrote the lyrics called You Say Hola and I Say Hola. The reason that I got cast on Sesame Street, along with Emilio Delgado, who's Mexican-American, was because Mexican activists on the West Coast saw that Susan and Gordon were great role models for African-American children, and they decided that Sesame Street should have role models for Latino kids. It was their activism that created the need to have me on the show. And of course, Sesame Street said, okay, cool, so we'll audition some actors. I was lucky to be one of them. So that's how I got on the show. The reason I got on the show was so that Latino kids would have somebody to relate to. We were gonna close the education gap, eliminate racism, very idealistic time. In retrospect, as far as my contribution to bringing Latino stars on the show, I think it's interesting that I brought in Nuyorican talent. Because I'm Nuyorican. I was born and raised born in Manhattan, but raised in the Bronx. And the first talent that I thought of bringing was Ray Barretto. And then because my parents played so much traditional Puerto Rican music, it was something that I loved. And Los Pioneros de la 21 were it. You have to understand that at that era, there were hardly any Puerto Rican actors that the show could pick from. There was a very small Latino acting pool. We were invisible. Nobody knew who Tito Puente was. Only in our community we knew who Tito Puente was. The bigger world did not know who Tito Puente was. They knew who Mongo Santa Maria was because he was a big megastar in the jazz world, but people like Ray Barretto were famous amongst the Latinos in the Latin community. So they were not called upon to participate on Sesame Street. I was raised in a very chaotic environment. There was domestic violence in my house, and I watched television as comfort. I used to lose myself in those musicals. So when I got on Sesame Street and I was Maria, I always used to remember that. And I used to think, there's kids out there that are watching me for an hour of sanity and comfort. People say often that you overcome a difficult childhood to be a success. As I said, I had a difficult childhood. There were restraining orders, there was violence. But I don't think I overcame that to become a success. I think that I became a success because of that. I started writing scripts for Sesame Street, and that was great. And then Sesame Street started to sort of expand the cast and shoot less shows, so I had more time on my hands, and I had a lot of creative energy. So I wrote the picture book of No Dogs Allowed. And it's a memoirette, I thought. They're all little stories of really things that happened to me. And then I wrote A Box Full of Kittens, and that's also based on a true story. It's a story that all kids could relate to. It's about being empowered. All humans can relate to that feeling. It just happens to take place in a Puerto Rican environment. I have always been working on a memoir, but another book got in the way, The Revolution of Evelyn Serrano, which takes place in 1969 when the Young Lords, the Puerto Rican activist group, took over a church in El Barrio. It was the first time that I saw Latinos make a political stance. And all of a sudden they were saying things about being proud to be Puerto Rican, and I said, what? Trying to make believe we're not. And they were bringing all of this up out in the open. They were the ones who were embracing how Puerto Ricans can be African and saying, guess where the bomba came from? That's black. And that was shocking. So I wrote a book, The Revolution of Evelyn Serrano, and it's a girl coming of age, finally being comfortable with being Puerto Rican, but she's caught between her nationalist Puerto Rican grandmother and her docile mother. And she thinks she has to choose between them. It's a young adult novel. And then finally, I got into writing my own memoir. Writing children's books that have Latino themes and Latino people in them is a way that I can continue to contribute to the community. I'm very interested in children and how they see the world. And I'm really interested in immigrant children because they really are seeing many worlds at the same time. And I hope to write literature that they can appreciate, that appreciates that they have that disparate ideas about things.